To this week's IG Live. Today we are going to be talking to Cindy Ingram, who is a longtime member of the MKB family, and she's going to be talking to us about art education and why it is so important. She has Art and Self podcast. You can also find her on Instagram at Art and Self. Let me just get her on here for you. That you can get involved in the art class curator art connection circle, and she has a new memoir that's coming out in just a few days called Art is About Being Whole. So we're going to find out about that too. Hello.
You can hear
Yeah,
me okay?
I can hear you fine.
Sweet. It's my first Instagram live and I managed to do it. I'm impressed with myself.
I'm surprised because I know you do podcasts. I mean, you do so much,
Oh,
and I see all these interviews that you've done, but I'm surprised it's your first IG Live.
I know. Yeah. It's the first time for everything.
Well, I'm excited that the first time is with us, so thank you for doing that, and happy to talk with you because you've been part of MKB for a really long time, and you've written some amazing articles for us that people can go and see on our website, and of course you have so much available on your website. But why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do?
Sure. I'm Cindy Ingram, and I have run the site Art Class Curator for the last almost 10 years. Started in 2014, and that site is dedicated to helping people, mostly teachers, but homeschoolers, parents as well. We have a lot on the site as well, but helping you connect your students with art. And it's not about the making of art, but it's about the looking at and appreciate. I hate the word appreciating, but that's the best. That's the word most people know. Looking at and connecting with works of art and how to do that and how to connect in a personal way. And then just in the last few years, I've started branching out, kind of working with adults too, because I started to really think about how I use art as a tool for growth and as a tool to better know myself. Mm-hmm. And so I started to work with adults in what I call the Art Connection Circle. And in that time, I also have written a book, which is coming out next week on Tuesday. And it's called Art is About Being Whole, a memoir.
That's amazing. And so where did your passion from art come from? Were you always interested in art as a kid?
Oh, yeah. When I was a kid, I was one of those kids that was constantly drawing. And I'm of the generation too of the classic 90s, 80s, 90s Disney movies like Little Mermaid, Aladdin, Lion King. Like that was my era. And I was obsessed with those movies. I wanted to be a Disney animator, and I was constantly drawing nonstop. But I knew that when I watched those movies, especially Lion King, that was like the most pivotal one for me, is that I would have these really emotional reactions to the art and the music and that were outside of the story of just me connecting with the art. And so that was my first sort of inkling that me engaging and experiencing art was something special. And so once I figured out art history existed and other artworks existed, I lived in a small town, so I didn't really know. Then I sort of went full force into that realm, and I only just started making art again just in the last year.
Wow.
So, yeah.
So you mentioned before that you hate art appreciation, that phrase. What do you like instead?
Yeah, I say art connection.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, people would be like, "Oh, you go to Cindy for art history," and I'd be like, "No, that's not right." Mm-hmm. And I was like, "It's not about learning of the history." And then I was like, "Well, is it art appreciation? Because that's what they call it in college." And I'm like, "No, that's not what it's about either. It's about something deeper. It's about like the connection that you have." So I say art connection. It's not like a well-known term, but that's the one that feels right to me. So that's what I go with.
Right.
And art criticism is too. And I'm like, oh, that's not what it is either. That's all about the art. And all of those words are about the art. And the art is more than just the art. It's what happens between you and the art. So that's what I like to focus on.
So that's that emotional connection or that reaction you were talking about.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So then that kind of leads to my next question, which is about one of the things I'm the daughter of a music teacher. Awesome. Who always hated that at least in our schools, whenever there were budget cuts, it was always the music and art programs that went first because they were extra, mm-hmm. and weren't considered essential. And I know that's something you've talked about, is that art is essential. And so tell us more about that. Why is it something that should be so integral to education for kids?
Yeah, it's because what art is, art, music, theater, dance, all of it is an exploration of our humanity, who we are, why we're here, what we're all about. It communicates things that can't be communicated with language. Well, poetry would be the, I think the exception, but it goes beyond just knowledge. And I think that, I'm a good example of this, of how this doesn't work, because when I was in school, I was a GT kid, and I was like the one that was like obsessed with the class rank, and I was obsessed with like my GPA, and I was, it was doing the best in school, and I took Latin just so I'd do better in my SAT. Like I was that kid, and that's all I focused on. Did not take as many art classes as I probably should have, because I was so focused on that. But then I get into the real world, and I was a mess. And that, in the first kind of part of my book, you'll see what a huge mess I was. I didn't know how to communicate with people. I didn't know how to like exist in the world as a person. Like I was so tied to my identity of like what I know and how smart I am, that when you get out into the world and you realize that the world is not about how smart you are, the world is about relationships, the world is about how to handle adversity, the world is about how to handle uncertainty, and how to be happy amidst the chaos of all the crap going on in the world. And I was not prepared for that. And so it took me a good 20 years of therapy and self-help books and looking at art and thinking about it to heal from all of that. And what art does is teaches us how to do that. It teaches us how to deal with uncertainty, because when we look at a work of art, we don't know the answer.
Right.
There is no answer to know. And so we have to trust ourselves, and we have to trust our intuition, and we have to like lean into process instead of like an actual answer. We can't just pick up our phone and look up the answer. We have to like look within, and those skills are the actual skills that you need in the real world. Like my daughter's in biology class right now. Her poor teacher. I'm constantly using this as an example, but no fault to her. Her job is to teach biology. But like, where is my daughter ever gonna learn, like, need to know like all the parts of the cells and stuff, unless she's like a doctor and whatever. And it's good to know about your body, whatever. But like the level of detail that she has to learn about biology, when nothing in her education is teaching her like how to handle her emotions when she's like really disappointed, or like there's just so much that's missing, and art can give that to us. And also there's a second part to this. Well, after that was probably multi-parts, but is that too, art can be used in all of those subjects too, to make it relevant, like learning about the cells of your body. And then if you add in like some sort of art component, one, you're gonna remember it better, but also like you're gonna know why you're learning about the cells of your body, like because it helps you move, and like what does movement get you? It's like there's a whole lot more.
I love that. I think I would have liked biology class a lot better if we had art component to it. Let's see. We have a comment: a way to express something that just can't be expressed otherwise. Right. Yeah. And like you said, a way to connect to kids that the material is not necessarily connecting with them now. And mm-hmm. a big part of this for you that I think makes what you do also different than maybe some other resources that are out there is your emphasis on diverse art. Yes. and looking globally. So why is that so important to you?
Yeah, I think, I have an undergraduate degree in art history. I was required to take like one like non-Western class. So I did get a little bit of diversity in my education, but that one non-Western class was pretty much it. And, most of our teachers, most of people in general, when they think of artists, they think of, Monet, Van Gogh, Da Vinci, Michelangelo, all of those like guys from the past, all of them white, all of them men. And we've been sort of conditioned to think that those are the most important ones, because those are the ones that are in the textbooks. well, that were in the textbooks. Thankfully, textbooks and art books have changed drastically. And those are just the ones that are focused on. And, you know, I'm going to kind of, I always go off on tangents, but I'm going to tell a story that will illustrate my point better. But like, I was leading a workshop for teachers, and I pulled in a work of art from a Mexican-American artist. And it's a beautiful work of art. It's in a museum, like, you know, it's a respected work. It's in like one of the biggest museums in the country, the Museum of Fine Arts Houston. And I pulled it in. It's also in my book. It's called The Anguish of Being and the Nothingness of the Universe by Marcos Raya. So I pulled this up, and I'm like, we're going to do this whole workshop. We're just going to look at this work of art and talk about it. And one of the first questions I got was, why did you choose this? And I was like, why wouldn't I choose this? And I was like, we have to really think about who makes the decisions on what is shown and what is not. And those decisions are usually made by the type of people who that art represents. So the people who are writing the textbooks, the people who were picking what's good, were the white men, and they were the ones in charge. So they were the ones that got focused on. And, you know, with our students, we know that representation matters so much. We know that when they see someone that looks like them in a movie or in a book, like, they notice it and they feel seen. Like all those videos that came out when the new Little Mermaid came out, of the little girl saying, she looks like me, you know, like that was so powerful. And that's true for art too. And I think, one, we need to question who decides what's good and who decides what we should include. And also, like, pick art that is interesting to students. Like, why? Okay, Monet, I respect Monet, whatever, but like, why show Monet's haystacks when you can say something, when you can show your students or your children something that like is exciting and interesting and contemporary and fits what their view of life, and has people that look like them and has stories that they can relate to. Like, just because someone says these haystacks are great doesn't mean that they're more important than anything else. So yeah, I could go off and off. So, but it's really important, like, to do that. And so in my membership site, which has lessons for artists, we make sure that we have a lot of diversity. I haven't quite gotten 50-50 to women, men yet. I've been really trying to do that, but a lot of the cultures too, we don't know the gender of whoever made it, but you know, that's just so incredibly important.
Yeah, and then comment, so true, representation is everything. And you know, it's funny because I operate more in the space of children's books. I review children's books, and so I know the conversation there and about how important it is for kids to see themselves, and like you said, to have stories they can relate to. I hadn't really thought about it as much in terms of art, but I think you're right. I think that's why sometimes kids aren't as interested in art or even in music, like thinking about classical music, because we're presenting these things that aren't really relevant or where they don't see themselves reflected. It makes a lot of sense that they would be much more interested in art if we were showing them things that were more relevant to them.
And seeing artists too, like artists that look like, not just like what's in the art, but like it helps them see like, oh, look at this artist. He's from my same background, and he's a professional artist, and he's in a museum. Like, maybe I could do that too. You know, it like breaks down those barriers as well.
Yeah, definitely, that they could see themselves and that maybe see it as a path for themselves. And speaking of paths, so I want to make sure we have time to talk about your memoir, which is, as you said, is coming out next Tuesday, which is very exciting. So tell us all about it.
Yes. Oh, it's okay. It's so good. I'm just gonna tell you, like, I cannot be modest in the situation because it's just so good. I've been working for the last few years on writing this book, and it started out as an art education book. And what I was gonna do is gonna tell people all this stuff that what you and I have been talking about. There was a chapter on diversity, there was a chapter on gender, there's all this stuff. And then the more I sat with it, the more I was like, well, how do I really show people what's possible when you look at art? What level of depth that you can get, what level of self-discovery that you can make, what emotional connection you can make, what things you can learn about yourself through exploring the feelings that come up when looking at art. I was like, I could tell people all day that that's possible, but I need to actually show them. And so when I realized that telling people it's not going to work, I was like, okay, I'm going to show this is a very simplified version of the story, but like I want to show them how. And the best way I think to show is through story, is through art. So I tell my story of how I told you I was a mess, how I went from a place of like very severe social anxiety, shame, childhood trauma, and how I used art as a healer, and how I moved through the world and got to a place where I feel whole and content and happy with my life, and not riddled with with anxiety. And then every chapter is a work of art that I interpret alongside of my story. So like there's a story there's a chapter that really focuses on shame and also my social anxiety, and I interpret Two Fridas by Frida Kahlo alongside of it. And so there's two Fridas, the one on the left, if you've seen the painting, the one on the left is kind of sickly looking, she's bleeding, her heart is kind of out open on her chest, she looks really uncomfortable, she's kind of pale, and then she's holding hands with a second version of her who looks really like vital and healthy and comfortable and like happy and whole in her own skin, and they're holding hands. And so like that's, I interpret that painting while also telling my story. And so I do that with every chapter. Like I have a period of burnout in my business that I use the artwork from the Jaws poster to talk about my burnout. And so that was super fun. And so every chapter is like that. And then I also, since we've been talking about how art is used to express things that can't be expressed in other ways, my book also has poetry in it. That's another thing I did when I was a child, was I wrote a lot of poetry, and then I hadn't written a poem in 20 years. And my book coach was like, pretty much noticed that I did write poetry. I just didn't call it that. It was just in paragraphs. And because I was really struggling with how do I convey the feeling of something when I don't have a story to tell around it. And that's when we were like, well, what about poetry? So there's poetry in the book too, which is it's not all poetry, but there's poetry kind of smattered throughout. And yeah, it's the best thing I ever made. And I've made a lot of things. Like 10 years in business, I've made a lot of things, and this is definitely the best thing I ever made. Really
but it sounds amazing. I mean, one, just the story itself, like the subject, I think is so important, especially now that we're, mental health, I think, is something we're much more aware of, or social emotional well-being is something people are talking about but don't necessarily know how to achieve. So that's exciting to me, to bring in art, but also what a unique way of storytelling by having the art interpret. I mean, it's like you're showing the process of doing it as you're telling the story of how you did it. You're kind of also doing it by showing. So I'm excited to read it. But tell us more about the title, because I was really curious about that. For those who don't, it's art is about being whole. And so where did you come up with the title, and how?
The title was a line from the book. And when we were reading it through, my book coach was like, this is a potential title. And the minute she said that, I was like, that is the title. And we tried out other titles, but it didn't work. Because really, I love the title because it communicates two things. And one of them is this quest I've always had for wholeness. I didn't call it that until more recently, which is wholeness is like this feeling of you're accepting yourself as who you are. So I'm in this body that society thinks is too big, but I am going to love myself anyway, and I'm going to, I am a little extra. I learned I had ADHD. I used to quash all my excitement. I used to quash all my energy to fit in. And I'm like, you know what? I'm going to accept that about myself, that I do lose things about 100 times a day. I do miss emails. But still, I love and accept myself anyway. And so it's this feeling of wholeness. And I always, in front of art, even when I was in sort of my most painful times, when I would go to an art museum and I would be looking at art, I would feel whole. I would feel safe, and I would feel welcomed, and my emotions would come out. I'm tearing up just talking about it, but it's like my emotions would come out, and I wouldn't be scared of them, and I wouldn't push them down, because it gave me a safe place to express them. And when especially if you grew up in like the 80s, 90s, like even now, I'm sure a lot of people feel this way too, but like, you're not supposed to feel emotions. You're supposed to be happy. Don't worry, be happy. It was like, the top song of the late 80s. And it gave me a place to where I could feel and where I could process. And so when I was in front of art, I did feel whole. And then, you know, I'd go back to my regular life and like all the anxiety and stuff would come back. And so I was just kind of like chasing that feeling of wholeness. And then the second layer of the title is what we were talking about, that art is not about appreciating. Art is not about learning that history. Art is not about learning about the artist or about drawing well, or about the elements and principles of art, the line, shape, color. Art is about something deeper. It's about our humanity. It's about our connections between me and someone else, and how we all fit together and how we all relate and how we have so many things in common. So art is just about more than what this limited box a lot of us put art in. And so art is about whole, and that wholeness of just accepting our humanity and loving it and embracing who we are and our connections. So
I love it. It's so exciting. I'm getting really excited about reading it, just hearing you talk about it. And I also want to say I appreciate that it must have been a kind of like, you're making yourself very vulnerable in writing this book. This isn't just a memoir in the sense of like, well, here's where I grew up and here's where I went to school. You're making yourself very vulnerable in this book, but I think in a way that is going to help so many people who I'm sure, like, you know, grew up also in this society that told them not to be emotional or not to, you know, that they have to do certain things to fit in. And so this is going to be so helpful and I think empowering for people to be able to read that. So I want to be respectful of your time, and I see we're coming up on time. So I would just want to finish off by telling people, one, where can they get your book? And then what are the resources that they can access through your website?
Sure. The book will be available on Tuesday, October 31st, Halloween. The link, you can go to artisaboutbeingwhole.com. That will you can sign up to get on my list to get the notifications to buy it. It'll also be just on any online bookseller that you want to go to. And my site for teachers and parents to connect their students with art is artclasscurator.com. And I have a membership site called Curated Connections, which has tons of lesson plans. It has about 200 different works of art, like very diverse works of art that has discussion questions, activities, like write a poem about the art or whatever. It has art project extensions. It's a really great way to connect your kiddos with art. And then I have a podcast, the Art and Self podcast it's Art and Self with Cindy Ingram. And that is where I just basically have a guest on and we talk about a work of art. So we put up a work of art and we just pick it apart together. So
I love it. I love it. That would be because I think there are so many of us that didn't grow up with that kind of way of talking about it and way of interacting with or connecting with art. So this is helpful. And also all the resources for teachers who want to do this but aren't really sure. I mean, it sounds like they're just kind of ready-made lessons that they can just pick up and use in the classroom.
Yeah, and there's training on how to talk about, like if you don't know how to talk about the art with kids, there's some training on that too. And kind of what do you say? How do you move around the room? That sort of thing in there too.
That's amazing. Well, thank you for taking time to talk with us today. It was really lovely to get to talk with you after admiring your work for so many years. So thank you.
And thank you for having me.
Yes. Thank you, everybody who's watching. If you joined us late, it will be up on Instagram in just a few minutes and later on our YouTube channel. And we'll also include all the links to the resources that we've been mentioning. So bye, everybody.
Bye. See you later.